They are risking their lives, pulling up straight next to this capsizing, ginormous ferry, and they're pulling people out of the water. And the only people that do something to save human lives, those are civilian boats and fishermen. What's frustrating is when the ferry starts to list, if the captain had ordered everyone to put on a life jacket and get to the dock where they're visible, the likelihood of every single person surviving was incredibly high. The amount of vessels nearby, not just civilian boats and fishermen, but the Coast Guard ships, the US Navy vessels, multiple helicopters, landing decks of the helicopters, over 1,000 Marines ready to assist in air-sea rescue. And America and Korea are on really good terms, so I don't know why they declined for help, but a lot of people think it's President Park was known to have a big ego and was very, very self-conscious about international relations, but not in the way that you want your president to be. Wanted to look good is all she cared about. So the US Navy vessel just loitered around waiting to be used at any given moment. They're like waiting to be called in because, you know, it'd be a shit show if they just went in there. But the call never came. The rescue could have been so successful, and these Marines are specifically trained in air-sea rescue. The Korean Coast Guard, they were more like patrol people. They patrol to make sure that there's no illegal fishermen from other countries fishing in their seas. Most of the Korean Coast Guard was on a job to look for illegal Chinese fishermen, literally. That was their job. So the US Navy, why were they not used? I still don't understand. The parents start freaking out, but they're told by their kids that, hey, mom, dad, the boat is sinking, but rescue efforts are on their way. I think everyone's got it under control. They told us to stay in our cabins and put on our life jackets. Many parents told their kids, okay, well, stick with your friends. Don't be alone. Don't wander out alone. And good. That's good. They have everything under control. Just keep calm and do what they say. These words will haunt the parents forever. A lot of them couldn't even face living with the guilt, because so many children would die from listening to what they said, from listening to what the captain told them to do. There were 476 people on board the ferry, including the crew. This is a cargo ship that loads on passengers on the side. 25% of their profits were just from passengers. So being incredibly irresponsible and greedy, they would almost every single time load way more cargo than was legally allowed. It caused massive dangerous conditions on the boat, and when they made this sharp turn, which is supposed to only be 5 degrees to the left, they went 15 degrees, and none of this cargo, none of these cars, they had almost 200 vehicles on this cargo ship. All of them slammed to the left because none of them are being tied down. If the cargo had been tied down, it probably might have balanced the boat back out. Just 2 minutes after the boat starts leaning to the left about 30 degrees, an emergency call is made by a student, Choi Tok-ha. Choi reported that the Sewol was starting to capsize. He was the first 911 call, and that the water was coming into the decks. Every single student and passenger was told to stay put. And now, all hell breaks loose. Crew members are calling so many different people. There's the Jeju Vessel Traffic Service, Korean Coast Guard, Jeju Coast Guard, Mokpo Coast Guard Station, their company executives. There's so many different people that this communication system is just bonkers. The fact that they don't have a system in place of like, if an emergency happens, this is who I call, is crazy to me. Nobody was getting anything done. So much time initially is wasted in these key moments. At 9:07 a.m., the crew confirmed to authorities the ferry is capsizing, and they confirmed that they needed help from the Korean Coast Guard. They stated the ship's angle made evacuation impossible. Now, here's where it gets crazy. Allegedly, none of these authorities knew that there were 500 passengers on this, well, close to 500 passengers on this boat. That's what they claim. So it's not even sinking just to the bottom like this. It's going to be completely inverted. The Coast Guard tells the crew on Sewol to inform any passengers, if there are any, to put on their life jackets. But they just say, oh, sorry, our PA system is down. It wasn't down. Now, the Coast Guard is like, okay, well, if it's down, then go personally tell the passengers. The crew member is like, okay, I'm going to do that. He walks out of the command center and walks around a bit and comes back being like, I did that. He did not do that. He just lied. There was a patrol vessel nearby that was coming in about 10 minutes. There was a helicopter that would get there in about 1 minute. And Lee said, yeah, that's not enough to save everybody. Like there's more passengers than that. Because one helicopter, you could save maybe a dozen people max. No, maybe like 6, 7 people. So the passengers up until this point are still being told to stay where they are and do not move. And some of the very first people rescued was the captain and a few of his crew. The captain was rescued by one of the small Coast Guard boats, and he wore ordinary clothes to disguise himself as a passenger. But he was rescued at a point where it wasn't just utter all hell breaks loose and there are people drowning and dying right now. He's like, okay, well, I think chaos is about to hit, so I'm gonna leave. Yeah, he's actually one of the most hated people in all of South Korea. He gets on the Coast Guard vessel and he doesn't let anyone know that he is the captain and that he has vital information that would help them in rescuing passengers. So while this is the situation inside the boat, mainstream media starts reporting that all passengers have been rescued. Danwon High School parents let out a sigh of relief. They start noticing something fishy though. They're trying to get in contact with their children, no responses. They contact other parents and they're like, no, we also haven't gotten any responses. And when they watch the news very carefully, the numbers aren't adding up. And it's not like some sort of conspiracy, but the government would report that they rescued all the passengers. Then a little bit later, they'd be like, okay, well, we have rescued majority of the passengers. Then it'd be like, oh, and these are not the exact figures, but it would be something like, we rescued 200 passengers. And then later they'd be like, we rescued 150 passengers. So which one is it? Who are you rescuing? How do you unrescue people? So frustrated, the parents, they start traveling to Jindo Island, the closest island to where the crash happened. They all go to the harbor and they wait. There's nothing that they can do. Not a single government official was at that harbor. Nobody responded to the family's frustrations or questions. So the rescue that government officials and media said was a success was not a success at all. The Coast Guard helicopter was dispatched to the sinking ferry at 9:10 a.m. They arrive at around 9:30 a.m. Two rescuers come down and rescue 6 passengers via helicopter. And these passengers were like on the deck. The helicopter starts communicating with the Blue House. And the Blue House is like the White House. And they keep asking, is the situation serious? The helicopter says, the ferry is tilted and currently being flooded. It hasn't sunken yet. Can you please send over a video? Now, this is being heavily criticized because time is of the essence. Such an urgent incident is taking place. And really, I don't know what to say because it casually feels like the Blue House is saying, picture it didn't happen. Over and over and over again, wasting time asking for videos. Soon after this, the Coast Guard patrol vessel 123 arrives at the ferry. They throw over a raft and they head to the ferry to start their little rescue. Just anytime I say rescue, don't think of it as a rescue, think of it in quotations because it's just a bunch of people acting busy. The first people to step into this rescue raft are the captain and crew members. Not all, but a few. But then so does the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard, the vessel, distances itself from the ferry and they try not to enter the ferry, get close to the ferry. They don't try anything. Meanwhile, there's about 3 helicopters that are just circulating, that are just loitering the area, watching.
What's the deal? What's the problem then?
No one's giving them any commands.
So they're all clueless on what the hell's going on.
Yeah, so everyone's just waiting around. And what's crazy is that there was a U.S. Navy vessel that was nearby that rushed to the scene and they're like, hey, we can help. And the U.S. Navy, South Korea was like, it's fine, we're waiting on a video. To sum it up, the rescue teams were just rescuing anyone that comes to the deck where you can visibly see them, but every single passenger was told to stay in their cabins. Blue House is still asking for videos, and the only people that do something to save human lives, those are civilian boats and fishermen. So one thing that you notice that's a problem is that all of these officials who get paid by the state, by government tax dollars that the civilians pay, they don't want to be the ones to make the call. They don't want to be the ones held accountable. So everyone keeps pushing responsibility onto each other. And that's what resulted in so many of these different vessels and helicopters just waiting around while people are dying. But many civilian divers who saw the news said they were gearing up to volunteer as rescuers. These are like professional divers who have been doing this that want to volunteer to save these kids, right? Many of the civilian divers, they volunteered and they started arriving at around 4 p.m. that day. The boat started sinking at like 9 a.m. They got there around 4 p.m. and they were told to report to a command ship of the Coast Guard that was stationed near the ferry. So these volunteer divers, they don't come to play. They're suiting up, gearing up, mentally preparing themselves. But the Coast Guard is not letting them do their jobs. The parents wanted to rent a boat to go out to see for themselves and to save their children. Well, the very first day, a group of the parents do rent a boat and they go to report back to the others what's going on. And one dad screamed, "They told us civilians can enter the water, but the Coast Guard can't." One of the civilian rescue divers had volunteered to go on the boat with them, and he was explaining, like, with these conditions, the Coast Guard should be going in. The conditions are calm. This is like optimal rescue conditions right now. Earlier that day, civilian fishermen were trying to break windows to save people, but the Coast Guard said, no, we can't do that. So they can't break windows, they can't go into the ferry before it sinks to save people, and now that part of the ferry is sunken, they can't try to rescue people by diving, they can't do anything. What are you doing? Why do you exist? Why do you have a job? April 16th was the morning the boat started listing. At 10:52, reporters went out to the scene. Still, nothing was being done. During press conferences, the Coast Guard made it seem like it is pure chaos out there with our rescue efforts. I mean, imagine the anger of the parents seeing that and they can't do anything for their children. The Korean Coast Guard was not trained for search and rescue. So they were allegedly just telling the Blue House, whatever you're suggesting we do, we're not capable. We can't do it. But they didn't say we're not capable. They're like, conditions won't let us. The condition is too bad. And what's crazy about this is that the Coast Guard official documents report that they were doing underwater rescue efforts at that exact time that the parents are out there watching them. There was no such thing. So how do your report say that you were doing intensive underwater rescue? They stated that they did rescue all night long, but all they did was get on a little boat and circle the capsizing ferry. So the parents, the reporters on this boat that saw this, they saw the discrepancy of no actual rescue efforts being done. They recorded videos of it, sent it to all the major news network. The next day, April 17th, it doesn't get any better. There is still no control tower, no organized operation. Nobody has one person that they're really reporting to. Even the president, President Park, she was MIA for 7 hours. The first 7 hours of the incident. She was nowhere to be found. So the president and the prime minister, they visit the area in Chindo Island where the parents are gathered. Apparently, a boatload of politicians, lawmakers, and parents had gone out on a boat to go visit the Coast Guard. And parents were disgusted. The parents said they stood there. They watched the politicians in suits go, It was like watching people pretend to do a job. It was like watching a skit. They felt like they were losing their minds. The Coast Guard is saying things that they know are not true, like, we worked so hard last night to do underwater rescue. Parents get out onto the dock of the Coast Guard vessel and they see divers go under the surface of the water, kind of like flap around for 5 minutes and then come back out. They said it's like a sick joke. The parents decide that they can't trust anyone, so they start their own task forces and have coordinated group chats to relay information in a clean and orderly fashion. They were more informed than the Coast Guard. The third day, April 18th, a lot of developments took place and none of them were good. The Sewol ferry was now fully submerged. Parents went out and they couldn't see the boat anymore and they cried. Government also let a private company step in for rescue efforts. A company called Undyne started to lead the rescue attempts, but it was more of a recovery attempt. It was like a half rescue, half recovery. So there's still a chance that you can live 72 hours in an air pocket, but it was guesstimated that most of the bodies being retrieved would be dead, so it'd be a recovery attempt. Undyne sucked so bad. Not only do they not have the proper equipment, but they also don't have the experience. Again, the US Navy was nearby and offered their assistance once more. They said, we have new compressors and we also have qualified professionals that utilize these compressors and have done rescue efforts such as this one. They were denied. South Korea said, thank you though, but no. This day also marked the first discovery or recovery of bodies. 3 bodies were recovered by civilian divers, but mainstream media said all of it was due to Undyne. Undyne recovered these bodies, and that makes me so mad because these civilian divers gave up a lot to help. They were not part of the Navy or the Coast Guard. They were moms and dads, corporate employees, professional divers in other industries. They were stay-at-home parents. Many of these civilian divers would end up permanently injured, paralyzed, traumatized, depressed, and some would even lose their lives because of this dive. Chonghaejin Marine is like a different kind of evil, okay? Chonghaejin's company's biggest shareholders are owned by another company that is controlled by a billionaire church leader founder, Yoo Byung-eun's 2 sons. The Yoo family received a total of at least $3.82 million from the ferry company. And you're like, okay, that's great, right? That means the ferry company is doing well. No, the ferry company was in financial ruins. The year before the sinking, they reported a loss of $800,000 that year. They were cutting down on spending because the bottom line wasn't making sense. And you know where they were cutting down on spending? It was not to give their shareholders money. It was in the training and safety department of employees and new hires. Prosecutors discovered that so much money was being funneled to the billionaire family, nothing was left for the actual company. Nothing was left to train the employees. The company was so starved of funds that they spent only $2 on the safety training for the Seowar's crew members. $2. You get hired, the company spends $2 to train you. And you know what that money was spent on? It was not an actual training. The $2 was spent to buy a fake paper certificate that said you are now qualified to be a crew member. You have done your safety courses. Life jackets, life rafts were left uninspected from the 90s. And the life jackets weren't even stored where they were supposed to be, which is on the upper decks or near evacuation points. They were stored in the passenger cabins. Crew members who worked for the company admitted in interviews they would have had no clue what to do in case of an emergency. They've never had an evacuation training or a drill. But that still doesn't explain why the ship sank. Well, we have the overloading of the cargo, we have the ballast water, but there's actually more. All of that is making the balance of this boat just unstable, okay? It's becoming more and more top heavy. The center of the gravity is not good right now, but it was worse because Chung and-jin bought the Seoul ferry from another company and modified it and added 2 more levels on top to accommodate passenger cabins, which would bring in more money for them, raising up the center of gravity even more, making it extra top heavy, which you don't want. They also underwent major renovations to create an art gallery where, you guessed it, they housed Mr. Yoo Byung-eun's art that he would sell to them at inflated prices. Also, more weight was added because they added these marble slabs, thick marble slabs to showcase his work. And the company knew that what they were doing was dangerous. You can't even act like they were ignorant because it was discovered that between 2003 and 2011, Chung Hae-jin had 5 crashes prior to the sinking of the Sewol ferry. It was even recommended that their license be suspended or revoked, but that never happened. They actually purchased more ferries after 2011. Company officials decided Sewol should be sold because of the complaints and the safety concerns, but that was vetoed by Mr. Billionaire Yoo Byung-eun himself. The executives instead started repeating the new mantra for the company, which was load as much cargo as possible. None of the cargo was ever chained or lashed down, meaning it would just smash around. What's insane is that there's regulators for these things. You can't just start a maritime company and be like, okay, well, I'm going to do whatever I want on my boats. There's regulators. The Korean Register of Shipping was an agency that's responsible for these things. They never followed up or facilitated inspections. Thankfully, many of those inspectors and regulators are in prison. And so now, we know that Mr. Yoo Byung-eun's children, the billionaire kids, they were also in prison, and Mr. Yoo, the billionaire, was found suspiciously dead in his apricot orchard during the nationwide hunt for him immediately after this. Like, right after this, everyone was like, what the hell is going on with Chung Hae-jin? They're like, who owns Chung Hae-jin? Oh, the major shareholder is this random company. Well, who owns that company? There was a manhunt. Civilians very early on realized that they were being lied to. So they tried to show their support to the parents with yellow ribbons. Even while news outlets are still lying, civilians tied yellow ribbons everywhere to show their support, to show parents, we know and we are supporting you. Since then, yellow ribbons have been used to symbolize mourning for the Sewol ferry victims, but it's almost now become synonymous with skepticism against the government and standing up to corruption. A lot was exposed about high government officials when this case broke, like how President Park was unavailable for up to 7 hours during the initial incident. So not only was she unavailable, but her and her administration falsified schedule records to show that she was on official duties at the time, which she was not. Which, even if you're on official duties, I'm sorry, your nation's children are dying on a boat, get it together, it can wait. She just wasn't involved. I guess I don't know if she wasn't alerted, or I don't know if she wasn't making enough calls, so now all these officials are covering for her, or her administration is covering for her. Now, President Park's administration was also exposed for bullying and threatening reporters and news networks for reporting on the truth. They even indicted a Japanese reporter who shit on her for handling this tragedy in the way that she did, and Japan slammed South Korean prosecutors, and the chief cabinet secretary of Japan said, freedom of press should be respected, and that indictment was far out of the norms of the accepted wisdom in the international community. So it's clear, the president cares about her appearance domestically and oddly, very much so internationally, and that's it. And when she decided she was sick of people calling her out for her vile, disgusting behavior, she said this about this Haewar tragedy. It's time to overcome the pains and hardship from this Haewar incident and move on to build a new South Korea. We cannot stay trapped in the sadness and frustrations that have gripped us for the past year. At this point, bodies were still being recovered. Not everyone has been put to rest yet. In the end, 9 bodies were still missing in the incident, and the parents stood by each other to make sure those victims came home to be laid to rest, which would ultimately lead to this Haewar being salvaged from the bottom of the seafloor, but it took a very long time to get there. The parents requested that this Haewar ferry be salvaged immediately because evidence, the bodies are intact, like, we need to do this, right? There are speculations that the government went out of their way to come up with a million reasons on why this was impossible. It's theorized that they were scared that the evidence would show incompetence. One big thing that got a lot of people mad was that out of 172 survivors, more than half of them were rescued by fishing boats and other civilians, and or commercial boats that had nothing to do with the government. Finally, the ferry was salvaged 3 years later. There were 9 missing passengers at that point, and only partial remains would be found in the salvaging. Many of the victims were put to rest 1,000 days after the tragedy. But by the end of October 2018, 5 people are still missing. The families of all the victims would receive approximately $177,000 for each victim lost, which is absolutely nothing. I mean, first of all, they didn't even want it in the first place, but it's absolutely nothing.